Hello everyone, and today I'm going to be talking about speech perception training for my mind concept map. So I actually chose to do my mind concept map on a poster, which I'm going to be posting below my YouTube that I'm doing here, but I also did a presentation so you guys can follow along with that as I go through my video. So today I'm going to be talking about two main ideas. I'm going to be talking about the background information that's associated with speech perception training and how it came about. And then I'm also going to be talking about more of the intervention side and a type of intervention approach you can use. So let's continue on. So the founder of speech perception training was actually Susan Robicheaux. She actually took a lot of information from other philosophers and researchers and eventually came up with this approach called speech perception training. She has quite a variety or an array of background. So she actually has her bachelor's in speech pathology and audiology. And she has her master's and PhD in experimental psychology. So she's quite a broad researcher. Actually, she's currently doing a study furthering her study of speech perception through investigating deficits in phonological awareness skills in preschoolers with delayed phonological development. So she typically looks at the area of young children and infants for her projects. Also she looks at bilingual learners, as you can see, and hearing impaired children as well. So typically for speech perception training, you want to look at younger children who present with phonological errors. And that usually falls between the ages of 42 to 66 months or the ages of 3 to 6. And the reason this being is because you need the child to be able to identify the word within a target phoneme category. And usually young infants or very, very young children aren't going to have those skills yet because they're still developing understanding of the sounds, even continuing on past 3 years of age. But they have to be able to say the words and understand them. So the philosophy behind this approach is quite extensive. It actually started with Van Riper, who looked at what he calls ear training. He believed that articulation treatment should be involved using extensive ear training, and this ear training was made up of loosely depicted activities where the child identified the correct and incorrect target sound produced by the clinician. So if they were to say cat, and they said, that's correct, the K sound is at the beginning of cat, and the kids said that that was correct, they'd be right. As well as if they said tat, cat starts with tat, and then the child would say that was incorrect, that would be kind of what he was going about. It also is similar to auditory bombardment. Van Riper's overall idea led into this perceptual motor theory, and also phonetic skill learning development. So these models use the integration of perceptual and sensory processing during sound production learning, which eventually led to the discovery of using ear training, which Van Riper came up with, on intrapersonal speech discrimination training, which involved the child self-monitoring themselves during speech production activities. So rather than the clinician saying the word, the child would say the word and identify if it was correct or incorrect. So these eventually led into a more linguistic approach, which observed the restructuring of the child's system of an underlying phonological contrast and rules. While it wasn't centered really around speech perception training, they did use some minimal prayer procedures, which falls under speech perception training. So Hodson eventually figured out that, okay, speech perception training is great, but we also need to use auditory bombardment in conjunction with speech perception training. And auditory bombardment consisted of the child listening to a list of words containing the target phoneme. So rather than ear training where they say it's correct or incorrect, they just listen to a series of words before the session starts in order to really get the child to tune into what sound that they're really focusing on, as we've seen in a couple videos in our other classes. So in 1992, they found that speech identification training can facilitate sound production learning for some children with delayed phonological skills. The treatment was shown to be effective in facilitating sound production learning where the child successfully learned perceptual tasks. This then led to Susan Robichaux's work, which her study found that interpersonal speech perception training can facilitate sound production learning for some children who are phonologically impaired, not all children. Keep that in mind. She also found that speech perception training could somewhat provide concurrently with speech production training. So the two should go in conjunction with each other. The training also, she believed, should involve asking the child to identify the word and contrasting the sounds that belong to that target phoneme category with sounds that belong to the actual phoneme category. I'll explain this a little bit further when I go into the intervention side. So a quick brief overview. Susan Robichaux found that auditory perception and speech perception can facilitate sound production and learning. She also found that speech perception training should be used in conjunction with speech production training. And also she found that training needs to be interactive. They need to provide prompting, they need to provide modeling, because that's what's going to help the child learn the phoneme categories the best. So now I'm going to talk about intervention. So as you can see on my poster, I have several pictures. So one of the main things that Susan Robichaux said within her her intervention approach, she said that you want to display a feedback picture. So this is a type of picture that the child will look at, and it's going to be in more of a sentence format. For example, the dog in the house, and you can look at this poster as well as I'm doing this. So the child will use the target word, and the feedback will be displayed. And so that will be retrieved by the child, and they'll learn the target sound. So then after that, you're going to want to provide a to-response alternative. So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to give the target word. In this case, our target word is going to be dog. And then I'm going to provide two other options, for example, fox and cat. Those are two very different sounding words. But I'm going to reintroduce the target word again and again along with the alternatives. So that will require the child to really listen and be focused on that one target word. And then after following my display feedback, so I'm going to show them the picture and I'm going to show them in a sentence, and then I'm going to show them the target word with two separate options. Then I'm going to go into auditory bombardment. I'm going to have them listen to the target sound over and over, along with throw in some other alternatives so that they're really focusing in on that one specific section. And then finally, I'm going to reintroduce the feedback, and I'm going to ask them to point to the actual target. So I'm going to give them a couple options, and then I'm going to say, can you point to the dog? And then if they can point to the dog, that means that they've understood that phoneme category. Obviously you'd want to do this with multiple different cards, with multiple different sounds with the D in it as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be animals. You could also do it with any number of sounds. So, also this can be used with minimal pairs, and it also can be used in conjunction with other types of speech perception training. This is just the one I chose to focus on. And I thought this was probably the most typical one. And I've had some experience with auditory bombardment, and I find that it is very effective for helping a child discriminate between the correct and incorrect response or understanding of what a sound actually sounds like. If you have any questions, feel free to leave questions in the comments, and I will try to get back to them as soon as possible. Thank you for listening.